So I appreciate for everybody for hanging out for the talk. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Holcomb. I am a director of information security and fellow of cybersecurity at Fluor. We're one of the world's largest construction and engineering companies. So I actually get to interface with a lot of industrial control engineers, a lot of top industrial control engineers. Some of the projects that I've been working on lately, and I'm not giving away any top secrets here, but Shell is by far the largest client that I've worked directly with, and we have two of their largest projects in the world that we're working with them on. One is for a new LNG plant, a liquid natural gas plant up in the far reaches of Canada. So if you're familiar with like Gold Rush, the TV show, or Ice Road Truckers, kind of think way up there. So that's one of the projects that I get to work with. So it's really exciting. And then also working with them on an offshore oil rig, which is it's a kind of a different setup. So it's interesting and fun as well, and a few other things that we'll talk about throughout the presentation. I do have some certifications out there. The big two I listed for this presentation, which apparently one I can't spell correctly. So I have two of the three SANS industrial control related certifications, which is going to come into play during this conversation because Rob Lee, who actually founded Dragos, as well as he also founded the NSA group, that hunts and finds other nation states attacking control system environments. He actually wrote and taught the grid class that I had attended, which was the best class that I have ever taken, primarily because of Rob and all the information that he shared. So he did a phenomenal job. I can't recommend it enough if you are interested in industrial controls and in cybersecurity and more from that response piece. So a lot of things that we'll talk about as we go on. And so here's what we're going to be talking about. So everything from, we talk about, well, no one likes ICS security, and we'll get into that. But for me, I remember, and the name of the presentation, I had looked it up, and somebody had used the name for a CTF machine for actually another event, which I thought was pretty interesting. But for me, I think like some people that get into cybersecurity, it's a TV show or it's a movie or maybe it's a book like Cuckoo's Egg or Sandworm, which we're going to talk about today. For me, it was war games. I was probably, I think, 8. It was funny because war games wasn't a really hugely popular movie. I do remember seeing it in the movie theater, where you got Matthew Broderick, right? He brings a pretty girl home from school, and he's dialing into systems and trying to break in. And remember, he was changing grades for everybody at school, and I just thought that was the coolest thing. And at that point, I was hooked. Again, it wasn't probably the most popular movie because the Empire Strikes Back actually was released the following week. So nobody was really interested probably in war games at that point, right? But that was the one for that really got me interested in cybersecurity, and I always remember that. So. I do jokingly say that no one likes industrial control security, or sometimes I'll just say control systems because that's how we refer to it at Fluor. But we talk about it, well, almost no one. And where this came from was when we did a survey of all of the ISA members. So there's about 500 folks that are active on the mailing list that we surveyed and asked, if you want to attend some training, that what subject are you the most interested in? Right? And so you can see, so active threat hunting came up, incident response and penetration testing, you can see all tied for that top slot. And we also talk about cloud security and bug bounty. So all really interesting topics in the field. And then we start going through the list. And this is the entire list that we were asking everybody about. And that you can see, and I should say, well, it's not at the very bottom, but it's near the bottom. So where we, just checking Discord real quick, all of a sudden, so I saw this big pop up in the corner of my eye. But you can see that industrial control system security was fourth from the bottom. So I'm sad to see MITRE ATT&CK isn't as high as it should be. I guess no one's worried about Security Plus and risk management, which really should be at the top of everybody's list, but that's a whole other conversation as well, right? So not everyone is interested in industrial control security, but it's one of those, to me, that everybody should be interested in industrial control security. But at the same time, I always talk to people in general IT, and I work with a lot of students like at Greenville Tech and talking and working with them in cybersecurity and how some of the IT students could care less about cybersecurity, right? And I can't understand that. But so I understand industrial control security is not for everybody. But part of the idea behind this presentation and then the free course that I'm doing starting off in December is really, why it matters to all of us, especially cybersecurity professionals. And maybe you don't work in an industrial control environment. That's okay. It's still important to understand those basics. The nice thing is that for experienced cybersecurity professionals, you have to remember that control system engineers, they don't have that cybersecurity knowledge that we traditionally have. So we can bring that knowledge to them and help them secure the environments. So when we talk about securing those power plants or those water treatment facilities, we have the ability to help them secure those networks. I actually was talking with one of our engineers I had never met before, a gentleman in India yesterday, and he was talking about how interested he is in security. And then he, for his home, he had actually created essentially a little IoT, but you could say an industrial control system setup where he had taken a Raspberry Pi and spun up a little web server on it, put a little code on there in Python, and used it to control a solenoid in his garden. So when he was away, when his wife, and he went on vacation, they could remotely control the solenoid to essentially turn on the sprinklers in the garden, right? And he thought that was really, that was great. And I thought, yeah, that's really interesting. And then I was asking, well, how do you control it? And he's like, oh, well, it's just a little web page that's connected to the internet and I can access it from my cell phone. We're like, can anybody on the internet access it from anywhere? And he's like, probably. And so there's definitely that, a lot of control system engineers aren't thinking about cybersecurity, right? It's just never been their focus. A lot of conversations we have around developers, right? Most developers still today, and no offense to any developers we have in the crowd, but most developers still don't see cybersecurity as part of their roles and responsibility, right? It's all about getting that application, writing that code, getting it out and getting it into production, where we're kind of still trying to come back and say, and that's great, right? And that's what you're here for. But we also need to make sure we do this securely. And that's the same thing with industrial controls. Now, I'm very lucky in my job because I get to work in brand new environments. So it's easy to say, yeah, let's build in security from the very beginning. Versus if we go into like a petrochemical facility that's existed for 30 years. There's a big difference. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but so Sandworm, and hopefully there's some avid readers out there. So Sandworm's a book written by Andy Greenberg. Andy Greenberg is the writer for Wired magazine. So anytime there's a story related to cybersecurity, especially if industrial control systems is involved, then Andy is the person that is writing those articles. And Sandworm came out and talked about this story about the Sandworm attack group, which is not giving anything away at this point, right? Is a Russian nation state sponsored advanced persistent threat group targeting control systems environments, and they do some other work as well, right? But the whole point is it walks you through the story of really mostly recent history, right? It's talking about events that have happened over the last couple of years, right? And also the history of industrial control. And really the whole point of the book, I think from his perspective, and not speaking for him, but it really comes down to this geopolitical consideration, which I, as a cybersecurity defender, have always tried to stay away from. Right? If we have an incident or some type of compromise, right, it's always focused about, hey, I want to contain it, right, and eliminate it as quickly as possible, right? Get the attacker off the network, prevent them from coming back ever again, and move on. I don't care where they're coming from. I don't care if they're associated with a nation state or not, right? It's all about just protecting the business. And yet there are a lot of those conversations to have around these considerations now, especially, and the main point, and especially the title of the presentation, is when do we get to the point where a nation, right, launches a cyber attack that results in some type of physical response? Right? So when does a bomb start dropping in response to that cyber attack? And so it's that kind of common theme that goes throughout Sandworm. So it's an incredible book. For those of you that have read The Cuckoo's Egg, right, which is Cliff Stoll's book from about 30 years ago, talking about the kind of that novelization of incident response from his perspective, and ultimately tracking nation state attackers. They just weren't so advanced back then. I always think of Sandworm really as the latest and greatest version of that type of book. So if you've enjoyed Cuckoo's Egg, which I hear from a lot of people, Sandworm, again, I see it kind of as this philosophical successor to Cuckoo's Egg, and can't recommend it enough. And this is actually the book that we actually read through it in that industrial course that I'm doing, industrial control security class in December. Right? So of course, who is Sandworm, right? So Sandworm, of course, the movie's coming out in just a couple of weeks. It was my favorite movie, many years ago. It was my favorite book. Oh, it still is. But the idea of Sandworm comes from where? Anybody want to throw it out in Discord? There have to be some people, right? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There's a few folks that are throwing it out there. Yeah, so Doom. So I'm really excited to see what they do with the new movie. It's supposed to be absolutely phenomenal. So I'm really excited. I want to actually hopefully try and get time to read it again before. I always think of like Paul Chalamet as Paul Atreides, but or Jason Momoa as I think Gertie or Duncan. So we'll see. I'm sure it'll be amazing though. So. But yeah, it came from one of the analysts that had actually discovered the attackers had linked or had found, right, links to Sandworm across multiple companies, because the actual attackers used references in their code that the references they took from Doom. So they had different names from Dune. So like they had Arrakis, right, which is the home planet, or another name for Dune. Interesting side point, and I'll throw out one of our prizes for anybody who knows this little bit of trivia. So the solar system in which Dune resides is also a solar system in which another popular planet for science fiction resides. Anybody know? Yep. So actually, Xerox, you got it. Yeah. So it's actually the same solar system as Vulcan in Star Trek. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So pretty funny. But I found that actually doing Google for Wikipedia once upon a time. So, but Sandworm is the story of, finding and tracking and learning about this nation state attack group from Russia. And so you can see, eventually we track it down to, okay, it's unit 7445 in the Russia's military intelligence agency, the GRU. So I kind of usually equate that to the NSA in the United States, right? Because the NSA is staffed with, yes, private citizens, but also a lot of folks that come over from different branches of the military, right? They're loaned out. Like when Rob, I think he was in the Air Force, right? Rob Lee was in the Air Force when he went over to the NSA. Same thing, Tim Tomes, who was in the Army when he was looking at joining the NSA. So a lot of those top minds that come over from military backgrounds. So Sandworm as a whole, right? They were responsible. They were the group responsible for the blackouts in the Ukraine. So in 2015, around Christmas time, right? They turned off the power for hundreds of thousands of citizens in the middle of winter, in the middle of night. And I could just imagine, being a father with little children, and all of a sudden we lose power, and it's the middle of winter. It's like, what do you do? I mean, mind blowing. And then the Russians, just not to be underdone, right? They came back almost a year to the date and did it again in 2016. Different entity that they targeted, but they still resulted in a blackout. Few less victims as well, but still, it was a blackout, right? And all of these operators in power generation facilities had to go to manual operation. So they got back up and running, right? But they couldn't use their automated control systems, right? It was all back to manual operation. So you had people in facilities that weren't 100% safe, right? So they're in physical danger to some degree, flipping breakers and flipping switches and manually operating systems. And they had to do that for about 6 months before they knew they could rely once again on their control system, right? There was word that there was actually a third blackout in 2017, where the Russians had come back almost a year to the date and killed power off again. That one was just kept really hush-hush. I think the Ukrainians just didn't want to look any worse from a cyber defense perspective than they already did, right? Well, you talk about, and there's malware that they had used at the time. So if you heard, and I don't even have Black Energy, End Destroyer, Crash Override from hackers, right? The movie Kill Disk was also their invention, which they used to wipe machines. So which is also these are part tools, right, that evolve into NotPetya. So when we talk about NotPetya, right, that caused over, you can see, $1 billion in damages globally. It's probably well over 2, because most companies, when they report damages, it's usually about half of what actually happened. So it's always those interesting conversations you get to hear behind closed doors. And it's like, well, yeah, we lost, 500 million. It's like, well, it was really closer to $1 billion, or maybe a little bit more. Right? But we had, some of the largest companies like Maersk, right, and Merck, right, one of the largest pharmaceutical manufacturers, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, right, were shut down for days and weeks, right, with global impact, right, as much as COVID. But back then, it was a huge drain on the supply chain, and we saw those impacts. Right? There's some, and again, going back to Andy Greenberg, he has some great articles that he wrote for Wired that you can find on especially NotPetya and what happened behind the scenes, especially at Maersk, and how they had one domain controller that was not touched because of a blackout in Africa at one of their offices. And that was their only backup that they had to be able to restore the entire company. So it was a really fascinating story. So then we talk about French election meddling, the Winter Olympics attack, and shadow brokers, right, are all related in some way, shape, or form with Sandworm. And here's some of the folks that are Sandworm, right, and they have some wonderful hacker handles, but the whole point is, right, they're just other people, just like you and I. Right. I imagine, like, if I'm working for the NSA, right, I mean, this would be me, just, the Russians would be looking at my picture like this. And I also think of, cyber crime, right, and cyber criminals. Like, I can, understand, especially if, I didn't have a job, or especially if I lived in an environment, or a country where there weren't a lot of options, right? I could understand people turning to cyber crime to feed their families, right, completely. So I'm not going to blame anybody for, especially wanting to serve their country ever. Right? But at the same time, yeah, they're on the most wanted list by the FBI. Now, Russia is never going to extradite these what we would say are criminals, right? Because they're going to protect their own people. And it's interesting to have that conversation because, well, we do the same thing, right? Who's this? And I'm not giving away state secrets here, but you know who this is? He's definitely a big friend of BSides Augusta. I see at least one person typing. And see all the dots and then they go quiet. Like one of those bad movies. He was an NSA member that was outed by Sandworm. Yeah, so this is actually Jake Williams. And so if you ever go to BSides Augusta, you'll see Jake talking, right? Super great guy, super smart, as you can imagine. He actually teaches the reverse malware engineering and most advanced malware authoring class for SANS, right? He runs Redition InfoSec. Right? And so you'll see Jake, like I said, I mean, great guy, right? He comes to share all the information with the community. I think in this case, he was doing a presentation on privilege escalation. And at the same time, yeah, he was outed as a member of the tailored access operations team at the NSA, which is also what a lot of outside entities refer to as the equation group. And so we call the Sandworm attackers Sandworm. Yeah, they call the tailored access operations group the equation group. And so Jake was outed by the shadow brokers on Twitter publicly as a member of the equation group. Potentially an author of Stuxnet or related, right? Potentially, I don't know. But the idea is, and he mentions, and there's a great Darknet Diaries episode that features this story. He mentions like he found this out right before he was to travel for SANS to, I think it was Singapore. And he's like, I can no longer travel to Singapore because I could be extradited to Russia for crimes against Russia for being a member of tailored access operations. Right? So the whole point, I think it's just this story of, it's looking at all sides of the story, right? I always say, if you cut me open, I bleed red, white, and blue, right? But we have to remember, the other people that are across the table from us, right? And we're all here, and we're all trying to serve our country, right, in the best way possible. Well, what we find though is, and this is a great part of Sandworm, is we see that we as private citizens, or we as operators of control system facilities like power plants, petrochemical facilities, water treatment facilities, right? We're caught in the crossfire of these nation states. Typically, most attackers against control system facilities are going to be nation states. Now we're seeing that start to change. So a lot of you probably have heard, and maybe were infected or impacted by the Colonial Pipeline breach that we had in, was it March? I remember, thankfully I was living in Lexington for most of the time, but I remember coming back to Greenville after a week had gone by, the pipeline was up and running, but most gas stations were still out of gas. I tried like 5 or 6 different QT gas stations, and like everybody was out of gas, right? Because of a control system outage. Now, it wasn't an attack against control systems specifically. It was just the back office at the company that runs the pipeline became infected with ransomware, just we'll say generic ransomware, and that they were afraid that ransomware would shift into the control system environment. So they shut down all the control systems that ran that pipeline. So then the pipeline goes down. There's one thing you have to remember nowadays is that the vast majority of control systems now, and you talk about things like PLCs or HMIs, right? Programmable logic controllers or human management interfaces, or we'll talk about data historians or trying to think, there's tons of terms we can throw out there. At the end of the day, the vast majority now, they run Windows or they run Linux, right? Some flavor of Windows, some flavor of Linux. And so from a network security perspective, right, it's just another host on the network with an IP address, with listening services and vulnerabilities that we could potentially remotely exploit. It just has a different effect. Right? So instead of accessing a database server, right, with sensitive information like credit card numbers or social security numbers, right, it's maybe a Windows machine or a Linux machine that's responsible for turning a large turbine that's used to generate electricity. And if I can access that system, can I shut down the turbine, right? Or can I make it speed up or slow down, right? Potentially, right? Just depends on how that system is set up and configured. Now, we also have this idea of industrial Internet of Things. So this is where we take industrial control systems and we connect them to the internet. So think, in a simple form, right? When I was mentioning the floor engineer that took that little solenoid in his garden and connected it via a web page to the internet so he could hit the web page and turn on his sprinklers. In this case, think of if I do take that turbine that spins to generate power and put that on the internet, then that's a whole other story, right? So we started to think there's even additional cybersecurity concerns, right? When we talk about taking control systems and connecting them to the internet and allowing them to be monitored and potentially controlled from the internet. And I'll also mention, I have a ton of slides in here, and it's just mostly for reference material. We're obviously not going to get to all this, right? But in control system security, in cybersecurity in general, we always talk about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I already alluded to, in control system environments, the main focus is availability. Right? If I'm a power plant operator, right, it's all about making sure that power plant stays up and generating electricity. Right? That's the only thing that matters to me. Now, we've started to see, operators over the last couple of years understand, right? Part of that availability is making sure they're secure. So somebody can't bring them down through something as simple as ransomware or a more sophisticated nation state attack. And so cybersecurity has come into play for a lot of these operators over the last couple of years. But again, just think that they're still primarily always worried about staying up and running. They're not worried about, is your data encrypted, right? Or are we verifying signatures for data that we're importing from a remote system? For the vast majority of these operators, it doesn't matter, right? It's all about keeping the plant up and running. So it's our job as cybersecurity professionals to help them understand how they can secure the environment. Just like, again, we can help developers that don't understand security. We can help them understand how to write secure code. And so we talk about, there's a lot of risk that we talk about in industrial control environments. And we talk about different types of attackers. Again, there's really nation states and some random groups like ransomware operators that have the option to be able to, impact the environment. We talk about cyber warfare, which again is a big focus of this presentation, because again, we're getting caught in the middle. I don't work for the military. I've worked with the military before. I got to spend time with the Marines. I actually practically grew up on Camp Pendleton because of my grandfather. I got to work with the Navy SEALs for about 2 years, which was really exciting. But I've never been in the military, right? So, but we as private citizens and private public organizations are getting caught in the crossfire, right? And we can talk about the history, right? And again, Sandworm does a great job of covering the highlights, Where the big one I want to talk about, though, is Stuxnet. So probably most of you have heard of Stuxnet, right? Which is where nation states going to cyber war really started. So when we look at Stuxnet, right, it was created and it was used by who? There were two countries that used it to target Iran, right? What were the two countries that targeted Iran with Stuxnet? Yeah, it was the United States and Israel. And so that's really, and it goes back to, it's one of the main points in the book, is Stuxnet was the first point in history where one nation state, at least, was known, right, to target another nation state. And of course, the United States and Israelis, their idea was they wanted to delay the Iranians developing a nuclear bomb. And so Stuxnet was developed to interrupt the centrifuges that the Iranians were using at the Natanz facility in Iran to enrich uranium. And so the Americans had discussions about, do we drop bombs where we could potentially kill people and have collateral damage? Or, hey, why don't we take this cyber approach? And we can do this without dropping the bombs and without killing anybody. So I like that idea, right? That's great. I mean, we're not killing, innocent civilians and scientists. But at the same time, once it was discovered, this is where other countries like Russia and like China and other countries around the world really took note and said, one was, hey, the United States, right? Nothing happened to the United States or the Israelis for Stuxnet, right? There were no repercussions. So it's like, well, if you can do it, well, then I can do it too. And then at the same time, I think it was showing the other groups like China and Russia that wow, that was actually some pretty impressive code, right? Stuxnet actually used 40 days. And not only that, but did target specific industrial control environments like Siemens. And so they really started to step up their game at that point. And it was really, it's just that escalation where everybody was off to the races. So for a lot of us being in the United States, right, we actually started all of this to some degree, right? And there's a lot of nuances in that conversation, but at a high level, right, we're the ones that picked the fight. And now we look at where we're at today, where again, that's where Sandworm is great. Because, and if you get the latest edition, right, it's fairly updated. So no, it doesn't cover anything that's happened over the last year or two. Because I remember the last time I did this presentation at the ISA group, and this was, I think, in February. So literally the next day, there was an article about Biden talking about physical response to cyber attacks. So I do want to mention, if you want to learn more about control system cybersecurity, the best place you can go to is Dragos. Dragos does their year in review report. So you can think of this as the Verizon data breach investigation report, right? The DBIR, but for control system environments, right? Dragos is run by Rob Lee, or they go Rob M. Lee, because he teaches the SANS grid class. It's incident response in industrial control environments. And like I said, phenomenal class. He's a phenomenal person. And does some amazing work with Dragos and SANS around control system and cybersecurity, right? But they talk about, here's all the, and here's all of this whole timeline that just from 2020, right? Everything that happened where was targeting control system environments. What all this amounts to is there's new groups that are continually coming out, right? Targeting control system environments. And whether they're nation states, or now we're seeing ransomware operators actually building in code to target specific industrial control environments. So it's not just the nation states any longer, right? That they're breaking in and access information. And we still see groups like Sandworm out there. And of course, we wrapped up 2020 last year with the Solarwinds breach, which was devastating when you talk about a foreign entity having access to every email message in the Pentagon or the Department of Treasury, or able to read the Windows source code, right? Because they were in Microsoft for months as well. Amazing, right? It's amazing where I have to admire it from a technical capability perspective. But Dragos also in their year in review, right? They talk about some of the issues that they have and that they see. And you can see that second point I talk about, that 88% of their pen test engagements, they easily get into the control system environment from the back office. Wow. That's really concerning. You can see 50% or 54% of networks had shared credentials between the back office, where everybody sits and they browse the internet and work on spreadsheets and read their email, and then the control system network. That's pretty concerning as well, right? So if your username and password work in the control or the back office where most attackers start, and they find a path into the control systems, which is almost always there as well, then they can use those same credentials in the control system environment. And so a lot of control system environments, again, they're not built with security. A lot of them are 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. I think of some of the nuclear power plants that we have, how long they've existed. A lot of our power plants just in general have existed. And so there's a lot of concern. So we have to work to, again, this is where we as cybersecurity professionals, I don't have to understand how a control system works. Now, it's great, and you should have a basic understanding. That's the whole point of why I put together the industrial control class, and I'm doing it for free to help you understand, because then you can take your cybersecurity knowledge and bring it into industrial control environments. I work in a 50 billion with a B, liquid natural gas facility we're building for one of the largest energy companies in the world. And I don't do anything special that I wouldn't do for a small company with 10 computers, realistically. It's all the same basics, believe it or not. So a lot of people, I understand, aren't interested in control system security because control systems can seem very, just like this very almost abstract thing that we don't understand. And at the same time, those systems are just other computers. Now, control system engineers hate it when you say that. But you know what? It's got a processor, it's got memory, it's got a network interface, probably has an IP address now, probably running a web server, right? It's running Windows or Linux essentially, or some other operating system. And so again, it's if you're even remotely interested in control system, right, environments, right, the world needs you, right? We need you to bring that cybersecurity experience to the table and help these environments understand how to secure them. And don't be intimidated by PLCs and HMIs and all the acronyms that are out there, because you can learn those and you can understand. Again, they're just other systems with IP addresses on the network, running Windows and running Linux. So again, there's a lot of great information, of course, in the slides for reference. A lot of this comes from the Dragos year in review. So go to their website and access the report. It's all free. They do, an amazing work when they put those together. So again, why are we here, right? Again, we're getting caught in the crossfire, right? If I'm an administrator for Merck or Maersk, right, or the hospital where they actually had to turn away ambulances and patients because all of their systems were down because it was infected by NotPetya, where everything got wiped. Right? We're getting caught in the crossfire with Russia going after the Ukraine, which is what NotPetya was. Or what if it is Russia going after the United States, or the United States going after Russia, or China, or right? It's a lot of interesting conversations I have that I have to be careful about when I do presentations for our employees in Russia and China and all this other country. Right? What is the impact to critical infrastructure? Now, most environments, especially in the United States, are very resilient. They're not perfect, but you're not going to have a total blackout because of a cyber attack. You're not going to have a nuclear power plant explode into a mushroom cloud because of a cyber attack, because there's physical controls that are also engineered into the design. So it's simply not possible to have that. Can certain damages occur? Yes. Could somebody get hurt locally or die? Yes. But it's very limited, but those still all horrible consequences. So again, the geopolitical, the military considerations, right? When does physical war, right, become that escalation point to a cyber attack? So, and where we go, right? Solarwinds, right? When that hit, I mean, that was huge. And we're, I think, still even finding out a lot of the repercussions right there. But it's damage. So just a lot to think about. But again, if you're interested in control system environments, even in the littlest, right? Again, don't be intimidated, right? Learn as much as you can, but bring your skills to the table to help these other control system engineers secure their environment. And so I mentioned in a couple upcoming classes, right? We're doing the 2-day free workshop for pen testing on November 4th, 5th, the 1-day incident response, which is $99 with all the proceeds going to ICE and BSides, and the intro to industrial control systems. So we'll actually talk about what is a PLC, what is an HMI, right? Why are these, what's a data historian? Why are these important? And then how we secure them. And what you'll see if you're familiar with how to secure general environments, we use the same tactics and techniques. So hopefully everybody enjoyed the presentation. Oh, thanks, Chris, for putting the link out there. So I appreciate that. So, and not to keep anybody over, because I know we got a couple minutes just until the next presentation. So, but and then Chris is actually up next, but I'll go and take questions for the next minute or two, if anybody has any other ones. I say, and Shay makes a great point, right? When we talk about industrial control systems, I can think of big turbines that are turned to power hundreds of thousands of homes, and at the same time, we also think of other automated systems like HVAC, right? So technically, when you think of even a thermostat, right, or a system that can control that heating and that AC unit, right, that is a industrial control system. Right. We were actually looking at, in my Greenville Tech class, we were actually doing Shodan research and seeing what types of systems we could find out there, and finding control systems that are connected to the internet. We actually found it was actually the HVAC system for the president of Furman University. So it was just funny. And we were just randomly looking around the world and actually saw Greenville, South Carolina pop up. It was like, well, what's this? And then it actually was the HVAC system for the president's house at Furman, and it was even labeled. They have a special name for the house. What was it? You don't remember? Oh, my girlfriend went to Furman. So she knew what it was back then. She forgot, but yeah, that was the name. So so it was kind of funny to see that.